Welcome to the Resume Storyteller, bringing you interviews with industry experts, regular folks who tested the job search waters and succeeded, and strategies to tell your story and land you job interviews. Here's your host, Virginia Franco.
Hey guys, I have with me today career clarity coach, Dr. Monica Marcelis Fochtman. She is the founder of Sheldrake Consulting, where she wears many hats to help mid-career professionals and industry changers get unstuck and regain their confidence so that they can love work again. As a career clarity coach and a resume writer, she works one-on-one with clients to help them not just survive, but to thrive during big career transitions. Monica provides personalized career and interview coaching, job search strategies, resume and cover letters writing services that are grounded in leadership development and career advancement. Monica, thank you so much. I followed you for a while on LinkedIn. I'm just a huge fan of your posts and all that you do.
Well, thank you. And likewise, I'm thrilled to be here and appreciate the invitation.
Most people don't come to this career knowing that this is something that they wanted to do when they were 5 years old. I'd love to hear a little bit about what brought you to the career space.
Yeah, well, and actually this is my second career. So it's certainly not something that I thought I would be doing when I was 5 years old. So my first job, if you will, my first career was in college administration. So I worked in higher education at various universities and colleges across the Midwest for 20 years. And in that time helped students and teams really become better versions of themselves. And that's the core that I brought with me into this new space. I started my company 7 years ago because I saw my students actually writing resumes and cover letters and job searching on their own, and getting really frustrated and spinning out because they weren't, writing their documents in the best possible way. And they were really underselling themselves and their experience. So I started to help them for free, and then started to charge a tiny bit of money for family and friends, on the side. And then I really came to my own career clarity and figured out, oh my gosh, this is really what I want to do next. And so hung out my shingle and then took my business full-time 5 years ago.
Right. Today, you don't work primarily with new grads, however, right? You work more with executives, aspiring executives, mid-tier. Is that right?
Correct. Yes. Yep. Mid-career professionals. I am a mid-career professional, and I also did my dissertation research on mid-career women. So yes, mid-career is my sweet spot.
Excellent. And do you work with men and women, or do you mostly help women to get career clarity?
Men and women. Yep, absolutely. Okay. Mostly women, but I have absolutely coached and written with and for male executives as well. Excellent.
Well, the article that I love to talk about today is one about how self-care won't fix burnout. And, the reason I was asking about men and women is that I know women in particular have really been struggling with burnout during the pandemic, but it's certainly not the domain specifically of women. Men are dealing with this as well. And I'm curious to know what prompted you to write on this topic.
Yeah. Well, so the prompt actually was an article that I read about how to take care of yourself, when you're burnt out. And I was like, oh, great. This is going to be full of like really actionable tips, and I'm going to feel better after I read this article. And the more and more I went through it, the more frustrated I got, because the article was about what I could do on an individual level to be less burnt out. And it just really got me thinking that burnout really isn't an individual problem. And by that, I mean, individuals experience burnout, of course, but it's not an individual failing. It's not a lack of will or a lack of desire, right, or, a lack of skill. Burnout is a systemic problem that we are asking individuals to try to solve on their own.
And do you feel like that has always been the case, or are you thinking that due to the last events of the last 2 years, that's become the case, that it's a systemic problem?
I think it's always been a systemic problem. I think the pandemic, certainly has pulled back the curtain, kind of a little bit of the Wizard of Oz going on there.
Yeah.
And I think, the Great Resignation, quote unquote, and, people leaving, people have really felt inspired to take a long, hard look at their careers and at their burnout, and have made decisions to try to make it better for themselves in other places.
No, I agree with that. And the last 2 years they've been rough on everyone. But you're right. Every article I see, with the exception of, what you were writing, what talked about how one person can help solve what's going on with them versus addressing it as a systemic issue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's so layered, and it's so tied, back to your question about men and women experiencing burnout. Men can absolutely be burnt out as well. Historically, though, and systemically, the burden of all of the other pieces, childcare, elder care, home care, historically, that has fallen to women.
Yeah.
And then, when you layer that with the wage gap, lack of access to resources, the glass ceiling, et cetera, it makes sense that women are feeling it more acutely right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think they articulate it as well.
Yeah, that's, if there's anything positive coming from all of this, I would suggest that it's, I think a lot of people, women and men, but women especially, are really starting to speak up en masse, and they're showing it with their feet, right? They're choosing.
I was going to say they're showing it with their feet. If anything is going to make people take notice of the mass resignation, reshuffling, whatever you call it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So when someone is overwhelmed, sometimes it can be hard for them to recognize that they're struggling with career burnout. How do you define burnout, and what are some basic signs that we should be looking for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for me, and how I define burnout, is that it is chronic and systemic. So chronic meaning pretty consistent, right? You're feeling this way on a daily basis. The Sunday scaries, right? If you are spending your entire Sunday afternoon dreading what's going, what you're walking into on Monday, that's a pretty big tell. And also, if you've been feeling this way for a long time, certainly the pandemic has absolutely exacerbated a lot of bad work situations. That doesn't mean, though, that every single person is burnt out right now. I think absolutely a lot of people are tired and frustrated and overworked, underappreciated. But burnout is really much, much deeper and much longer than that. Burnout is attributed to lack of resources available to you to do your job. So
an example, a sign of it would be if you have been experiencing scary Sundays for a very long time. Are there other signs that people, because I know before I recognized that I was struggling with burnout, I would have the Sunday scaries, but then by Thursday I forgot about them. And so, there are other signs that are telltales.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I would also suggest if there have been significant noticeable changes in your personal health. So whether that's weight gain or weight loss, inability to sleep, lack of good, positive sleep hygiene practices. Are you eating constantly fast food at your desk, as opposed to having the freedom to take, a half-hour walk around your block and eat a better, healthier lunch? Also, is there lots of turnover? That's certainly a systemic sign of turnover is a sign of burnout.
So
And
you need to be
also-
looking at individual signs as well as systemic signs.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And I would just to help to. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, and just another sign too is if a lot of people are burnt out because of turnover at work, right? So if your staff, your team is constantly turning over with new people, or they're not backfilling open positions, and you're doing the work of 2 or 3 other people, that certainly is a recipe.
Yeah,
you're right. And that's absolutely a recipe for burnout.
I'm seeing a lot of that right now. People that, because of the mass resignation, those left holding the bag are very, very stressed.
Absolutely.
So is there a way, or is it important to be able to measure exactly how burnt out you are? Like, are there, I know that you referenced some mind tool resources in your article, because it might be that it's a minor amount of burnout and it's an easier fix than if it's, larger.
Right. Yeah. And, the point of my post wasn't to like knock self-care necessarily. Because, self-care is absolutely important, especially now. And I think especially for women and for mothers. So self-care is incredibly important. I would suggest that, the layers of burnout or the degrees of burnout are these self-care measures not doing it anymore, right? Like if you have a good self-care routine, but you're still feeling exhausted and worried and frustrated and tired and anxious and under-resourced, then you're probably truly burnt out. But if you have a positive self-care practice and, you're tired, but it's not chronic, or you're still, maybe like you're 70-30 motivated, right? Well, then you're tired and frustrated, but maybe not burnt out.
Okay. Yeah. And I sort of see self-care as sort of a way to avoid burnout, where if it's happening even when you are doing that, then like you said, it's not cutting it. It's sort of your first line of defense is self-care.
Yeah, I think it's the first line, absolutely. But again, too many of the articles and all of the information out there right now, at least to me, my reading of it was that was like the only line of defense. And if you're doing self-care and you're still burnt out, well, then it's your fault.
Right.
Right. Just, to me, it's similar to the whole, like, are you in a toxic workplace? Well, some environments are just dysfunctional. That doesn't make them toxic. Right. So it's like, I think language, you and I, we make our living as writers, right? And words and language are so important. And I think it's really critical that we say what we mean and mean what we say. And that so that we can diagnose appropriately.
Agree. And I love what you said, that self-care is a first line of defense, but it's not the only one. And you're right. Too many articles focus on the bubble baths and the journaling and the sleeping, and that only cuts it so far. And one of the things that I know you talked about was, and maybe this is a next line of defense, is to establish boundaries as a way to help mitigate burnout for people. And I'm curious to know what are your thoughts on boundaries, and what might they look like, and how can one go about figuring out what they should be and then enforcing them?
Yeah.
It's a loaded question, I know.
Right. Well, that's a lifelong question too, right?
True.
Yeah. And, I see this with my clients a lot, and certainly again, the pandemic and Zoom and working virtually has created the illusion that we are available 24/7. But I really try to help my clients push back on that. And, do you have to be available 24/7? Like a lot of my clients will say, well, I'm getting email at all hours of the day. well, do you have to answer it at all hours of the day? Maybe like, I don't know, maybe you're a doctor or a lawyer, or like there's some sort of like true crisis, right? But a lot of times we create the illusion that we have to do something right away, that we have to be available. Whereas a lot of times you can do it first thing in the morning. It doesn't have to be done as soon as you get it. So that's one boundary. I think it's time and space. If possible, I took email off my phone. And that was a huge boundary enforcer for me personally.
Okay.
Because it's so easy to just, get the ding and like, oh, it's a quick client email. I'll just write them back.
Right.
And I found myself doing that literally like all hours of the day and on the weekend.
And no, I turned my notifications off my socials on my phone for that same reason.
Yes. Yep. Exact same. Yeah. And I took the only social media I still have on my phone is LinkedIn, and I'm close to removing that as well.
What you're saying though is to really question every assumption you've made when it comes to things that are contributing to your burnout. And seeing how you can reframe it and then take an action to reframe it. Yes,
absolutely. And then, so always with self first, but then the next level is with, colleagues, peers, and people on your team, your supervisor, because a lot of times they're feeling the same way.
Right. I love that. So when do you check your emails now? Only on your desktop?
Just on my desktop.
That's good. I should just remove everything from my phone. Like I said, I took the first step was removing notifications, but I do find myself still going in and checking it here and there. But I'm sure time and space is a huge area where we can make a lot of impact in our boundaries.
Yeah. And especially, working from home. So many of us are doing that now. Space too. Not everyone has the luxury of a home office, which I appreciate. I feel very fortunate in that I do have a home office and it has a door. So that's a physical boundary, right? Like I come into my office, I work, and then I can leave my office and literally and figuratively close the door on work.
Some way to separate the two worlds.
Right. Yeah. And, I know that's not reality for everyone, but if, for people listening, if there is a way to create a physical workspace where the only thing you do in that space is work, that can help your mind boundary too.
I love that. It's funny. My husband did not have a dedicated office, and I really, really didn't want it to be my dining room across the hall from me. And so he set up at the beginning of the pandemic, we got an ironing board because he put his laptop on there so that he could stand up and walk around. But he does it in this little corner of this room. And it's the ugliest space, but it's a space. And I think that's your point, is that mentally that's where he works.
Right.
Even if
exactly.
It's in front of a god awful ironing board. Yeah. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, I love that. That's such a great example of, adaptability and just making the most of what you have. My husband, we figured out early on in the pandemic that you could see the cat tower behind my husband. So we had to move that.
Oh, really? That's so funny. So time and space are two areas where we should be looking to establish boundaries. Are there other ones, or are those the main two that you really focus on?
So certainly those are the main two. I would also suggest behavior, both ours and of others, so I'm a mom and, have two kids, and, what is the boundary with my son's behavior? What is behavior that we will not accept, right? And needs to be addressed. Right. And so, back to the email one, a lot of times that's actually a behavior that needs to be addressed with someone. Like, hey, you're emailing me at all times of the day, expecting a response that's not realistic, that doesn't set me up for success to do my best work. Can we have a conversation about how to put a boundary on that expectation? Right. So, just like when when you're in conflict with someone, if their behavior has crossed one of your personal or professional boundaries, it requires a conversation.
Okay. I love that. And how you worded that, can we have a conversation about it that doesn't feel accusatory? It it gives clarity around what a boundary is for you that someone might not be aware of. Sometimes people will send an email with no intention, without the expectation that it needs to be responded to. But that miscommunication can lead to a whole pitfall of problems. So
absolutely. Yeah, there's so many assumptions happening, right, on both parties. And it really is, conflict and confrontation and establishing and maintaining boundaries, it's hard work. So I don't want any listeners to be like, oh, Monica is so cavalier and she just made this like suggestion and just go do it. It takes practice.
It's hard. And setting them up is hard, and then enforcing them is very, very hard.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Yep. But if you don't, then that's where, and I would suggest that's part of what contributes to burnout is, like you let one thing slide and then another, and then, past practice becomes a policy, and then people just expect things of you, right? Because you've let things slide for however long. Right.
No, I agree with that. Well, we touched on health a little bit earlier in terms of signs of burnout. And I know that you recommend that people make their health a priority. And again, much easier said than done, much like the boundaries. What are some baby steps that you think are helpful for the people to help them start prioritizing their health?
Well, I learned in my own life and in my kids' lives that honestly, Americans do not get enough sleep. And there's the hustle culture and like always grinding. And we grossly underestimate the power of rest. So the first thing for me was sleep, to become a more consistent and a better sleeper. And this is also related to my phone and social media, is to not doom scroll at night. So I do keep my phone in my room, but that's because that's where my alarm is on my phone. But I don't look at it.
Wait, what's doom scrolling? I don't know that term. I like it.
Oh, so that's, I'll try to find the article and send it to you. But yeah, it's especially women and especially mothers tend to do it more than men, because it's the only time that we are truly alone and no one
alone and quiet,
needs us. And so it happens most often at bedtime, and it's literally like we're laying in bed scrolling through our phones just to distract ourselves, and also because it's the only time that we've been alone. So it's called doom scrolling.
Oh Lord, I do that. Yes. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, I didn't either until a friend forwarded an article.
You're right, but it's the only quiet time. So what do you recommend as an alternative? Right.
So for me personally, I read. I love to read. I'm a very avid reader. So I've forced my bedtime to be a half hour earlier than it really is, so that I have that 30 minutes to read instead of doom scrolling.
So you doom scroll and then you read to close out the night because you've given yourself that extra 30 minutes?
I try to really not doom scroll at all.
Okay.
But I'm not going to lie and say that I never do it. But so reading, some people have found a lot of luck with doing a very basic yoga practice or meditation. Some people have even, they find meditation apps on their phone. but to listen, not to like actually watch, right? To just have it
Right.
on audio only, right? Yeah. And really the phone is, and there's all kinds of research too about how the constant like interaction with social media and blue light, like it actually physically interferes with helping your body start to relax and go to sleep. So that's a very basic one. For me personally, you know, I work from home like so many others right now. I started putting lunch on my calendar and I blocked it off. And, you know, maybe I actually eat during that time, but it's a time where I force myself to stand up and stretch. And if it's not raining or snowing in Michigan, I go for a quick walk around my block.
You block out time in your calendar for those moments.
I do. Yep.
Okay.
And back to boundaries, that is a boundary that I never schedule over. It's just a half hour, but I never schedule myself over that time.
So that's a deal breaker for you. You will not lose that time.
Correct.
And do you recommend, is it equally effective to maybe do a series of 15 minutes, like 2 15-minute breaks instead of a 30, or does it just depend?
Mm-hmm.
On the person?
Yeah. I think whatever works, you know, for individuals and for their schedules, but yeah, absolutely.
Some time to pull away.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And to physically change your setting if possible, and to move your body in some way. Again, all kinds of research about the benefits of walking.
Yeah.
Even if, you know, I live in Michigan, and I don't like the cold. So sometimes I'll even just walk inside my house, right? Like I'll walk down to the basement.
Leave your physical workspace and get away.
Yep. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. No, I love that. I love that. So shifting gears, I want to ask you about asking for help, because I know that is something that you wrote about. Could you elaborate on what asking for help might look like? So when I read it, I thought, are you talking about like asking for help with meals, or getting a housekeeper, or working with a coach, or all of the above? What does asking for help, what were you thinking of when you said that?
Yeah, I would suggest all of the above. I mean, if you are in a space where you could hire someone to help with meals, or, you know, someone to come help clean, absolutely go for it. I think women, especially, and mothers, you know, we have bought into this, you know, this diatribe, this rhetoric that we have to do all of the things. And that's also certainly a big contributor to our burnout, right? It's just not possible.
The first thing you said is that a big path to burnout is that when people have to do too many roles, and being a parent is too many roles.
Yep, absolutely. Right. Yeah, absolutely. And being a pandemic while you're homeschooling kids, right?
Yeah, a pandemic homeschooler. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Caring for elderly parents, you know, caring for a sick neighbor. Absolutely. So what I have learned personally about asking for help is to make the ask small and specific. Right. So a lot of times, myself included, when we're frustrated, we're like, I need help. Right. But which is true. It's easier though, and more productive, if you could say to someone, your spouse, your partner, your boss, your colleague, I need help with emailing these 500 contacts about this specific event. Right. Or, you know, to yourself, I need help cleaning. And so I'm going to start by hiring someone to come once a quarter, or, you know, once every 2 months, or once a month, right? But like to make it small and specific
and very actionable.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Yep.
I love that. So and that's something that you could do that in your home life as well, you know, obviously in your career.
Right. Absolutely.
With your team.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if you say to your supervisor, I'm struggling, you know, with this client relationship, do you have 15 minutes to help me walk through how to respond to this message?
Okay.
Like
I love that.
That's a very
Love that. And
small ask.
I feel like people want to help.
Yes.
But giving them direction on how to do that is absolutely key.
Agreed.
Yep. You might get help you don't want otherwise, or not
right.
at all.
Right. It's similar to, when someone in your family is sick, like instead of putting the burden on that person and saying, let me know what you need. Well, they don't know what they need. Right. So instead it's more helpful to say, hey, I'm going grocery shopping today. Do you need milk, eggs, or bread?
Right. What I love about every step that you've outlined is that each one requires you to sort of reflect on where you're feeling pain. And setting a boundary around it, taking an action, being specific in the ask. But it's helping you have clarity on what's wrong and what's causing the pain or the burnout. So I know you work with a lot of career changers.
I love career changers.
Okay. So I'm sure you've worked with people that are trying to leave a work environment that isn't working for them. How do you help people identify a workplace culture where they're not jumping out of the frying pan into the fire and getting into a similar culture?
Yeah. Well, it's not easy, and it's work. I think, to your point about, identifying the pain and identifying, what the real issues are is so important. And that's the work that we all need to do up front. And it's also the work, I think, that a lot of people want to skip over because it can be painful and it can take longer than maybe we would like. But in terms of finding new environments, that's where honestly LinkedIn and informational interviewing and networking are so impactful. Even starting small with, okay, so say you've identified a new company that you would like to pursue. Well, what are they posting about on LinkedIn, on their Twitter feed? What are the people who work there posting about? Or maybe they're not posting at all. That could be a tell too, right? And then to really utilize your network to reach out and to ask questions before you get, too far into a process. I think, the Great Resignation really, if anything, has taught a lot of people that they truly can be in the driver's seat of this process. And, that whole well, you're interviewing us as much as we're interviewing you. That's really true now.
Absolutely. And I'm starting to hear of people that have, I guess, buyer's remorse because they left and jumped into somewhere new. And sometimes I wonder if that is happening because people didn't do that culture homework.
Yeah.
And so maybe they jumped just for change's sake, and then the grass was not greener. Right. But I agree with you. Utilizing your network, trying to get some real intel can be so valuable. I love the advice to, it wasn't my advice, someone else's, to talk to people that recently left if you can.
Yes. Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Recognizing that some people are going to have very strong opinions, but if 3 or 5 people say the same thing, then you have something that's worth paying attention to, good or bad, right?
Right. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. And what's the, pandemic aside, what's the turnover? Are people leaving in droves, or, were people
leaving for the same reasons?
Right. Or were they leaving because they advanced? People leave for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah, exactly. But I know I'll hear from a lot of people where they're like, well, I just didn't agree with the direction that the leadership was going in, which is very vague and hard to identify a culture pain point from that. And so digging in and really figuring out, well, what is it about that direction that you didn't like?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I was just going to say, what direction were they going in, and what part of that did you not agree with?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Monica, you have, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, to your point, Virginia, about, going out of the frying pan into the fire. I think that's an easy, or certainly tempting right now, right? Like, I think some people have fear of missing out, right?
Oh, 100%. So many people are testing the waters just to see. If they can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm all for that, and I'm all for getting while the getting's good. But you don't have to leave, right? Like, maybe your situation is great and you don't have to leave.
Maybe there's changes you can make, modifications you can make based on an understanding of what is burning you out that
Absolutely.
will make your current environment a great place to be, or a better place to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a huge opportunity for self-advocacy, but even bigger than that is team and leadership and group advocacy, right? Like, okay, now that we know what we know about our organization, our team, what can we do differently? Like, quitting, I guess what I'm saying is quitting or leaving doesn't have to be the only option.
Yeah, no, that's true. And sometimes with staying, especially in a market where people are finally starting to recognize that retention is important. I'm hearing in certain sectors about bonuses and things like that. There might be an advantage to staying.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And a tremendous opportunity for you if you have the capacity and if you're being compensated, but opportunity for you to take on even more leadership.
That's right. If the environment's not toxic, certainly.
Right.
Great. So thank you so much for answering all of these questions. I've loved your advice. I love how actionable it is. And I feel like you've given people a lot of things to begin thinking about. So I described at the beginning of your bio that you're writing, you're coaching, you're wearing lots of different hats. What is next for you in 2022? We're now chatting in January.
Yeah. So towards the very end of 2021, I launched a group coaching program called Crossroads, which had been on my heart for a long time. And so we had the first cohort actually just finished in December. And so I'm going to be doing a few more of those. And
are those month-long coaching, or?
It's a 5-month group coaching, group mastermind for mid-career women. Okay. So picking dates actually to get that back up and running again, and really wanting to shift to do more coaching, more one-on-one coaching, as opposed to, I'll always write resumes. I love resumes and I think they're fun, but looking to really dive deeper into coaching.
Awesome. So if people want to learn more about you, I have listed your Sheldrake Consulting website. Did I pronounce that right? Sheldrake?
Yep. Okay.
Yep. And are those two of your kids' names?
No, those are, it's my street address.
Oh, I thought maybe you had a child named Michelle and one child named Drake.
No, that'd be a better story.
Better than Virginia Franco resumes, which is my accountant telling me I needed to come up with a name quickly. All right. So your email is Monica at Sheldrake Consulting, website sheldrakeconsulting.com. And then I have included your LinkedIn as well. Are those the best places to follow you and connect with you?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation. And I hope people can do some beyond self-care, right? Self-care
there you
first,
go. Exactly.
But then what are you going to do next?
That's right. Because it only gets you so far.
Right. Amen. Well, thanks so much, Virginia. Enjoyed our chat.
You've been listening to The Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco. To learn more about storytelling strategies to catch the eye of today's online skim hiring and decision makers, please visit www.virginiafrancoresumes.com.